Welcome, everyone. I don't know why this is one of my favorite subjects to teach, because I wish this on none of you, and that is when all hell breaks loose. But all hell does break loose in our communities, and it could happen in an institution, in a subset of the community, or in the entire community. And the question really I want us to grapple with today is, if or when that happens, what are we prepared with? What do we learn from when we go through this that we should be prepared with for the next time? I say this as somebody in the San Francisco Bay Area who has seen all hell break loose in areas that, that one would think it might happen, like around the BDS movement, and areas where one would hope it would never happen, such as a tragedy at a Jewish summer camp. I thank everybody for joining us. It's going to be very interactive today, and we're going to experiment a little bit with the power of Zoom. So I hope it goes well. And why don't we start with some introductions? Again, I'm Doug Kahn, formerly the director in San Francisco, and really been enjoying doing the summer seminars. And if everybody will unmute themselves for a minute, then it'll go really quickly when I call on you. Leslie?
Hi, I'm Leslie Anderson from Atlanta.
Great. Lindsay?
Hi, I'm Lindsay Mintz, the director in Indianapolis.
Aaron?
Hi, I'm the communications coordinator in Indianapolis.
Jesse?
Hi, I'm Jesse. I am the community relations director in Sarasota, Florida.
Great. Ari?
Hi, I'm the director in Dayton, Ohio.
Joe?
Hi, I'm the Vice President in Palm Beach County.
Justin?
Hi, I'm the director in Columbus, Ohio.
Lauren is from Detroit. Mara? Mara is from Buffalo, right? Did I make that up?
Yes,
And
the mic
Michelle.
isn't working.
Okay, Michelle? No microphone. And Michelle is from?
Dallas.
Dallas. Okay, great. All right. Well, maybe for when we break up into small groups, the two people who don't have microphones can call in, right? Or I don't know how they join the small group though.
So
That would not work.
Received in your confirmations a phone number to call in. So if you're able to, you can call in from there. Otherwise, I believe the chat will be available. So you may have to participate by chat.
Okay, so they'll be broken up into a small group, but okay. All right,
So
good.
ideally, if you all can, the three of you can call in, that's ideal.
Okay, but how will they be put into a small group? We'll figure out.
Zoom hypothetically should be able to do that for us once they've already called in. So
Okay,
Lauren
great.
has already. I would suggest doing it now if you're able to, and that way you'll be able to participate fully.
All right, terrific. Well, I thought it would be good to start with a brief case study. And unfortunately, it'll have to be brief because this is something that a community has lived with day in and day out for over a week. It is a case in point of what happens when all hell breaks loose. And when you think back of what were we well prepared for, what would we be better prepared for, and what does it look like? And to do that in a ridiculously short amount of time, I've asked one of our outstanding colleagues, Lindsay Mintz from Indianapolis, to share with us briefly because it's so relevant to today's topic. So thank you, Lindsay. And thank you for the amazing work that your colleagues did in Indianapolis.
Well, thank you. And as I try and figure out technology also, I need to find my notes. God forbid we actually write them down on paper. Right, there they are. Okay. Hi, everyone. Good morning and afternoon, or mostly good morning. Okay, very briefly, maybe some have seen, maybe some have not, that about a week ago last Saturday, so about 10 days ago, a massive anti-Semitic graffiti was found on 2 brick walls outside a synagogue in Carmel, Indiana, which is a suburb of Indianapolis. We learned about it on a Saturday afternoon. which means 2 of my 4 staff were out of town. And it was a conservative synagogue, so securing members of the synagogue on the phone on Shabbat was the first thing we needed to address. So the questions Doug put to me were, what were we prepared for? Well, first of all, I found out about it because a member of that congregation texted me a photo. Wasn't the president, wasn't a board member. And so the first thing was I had a relationship with a member of the congregation who knew to send it to me immediately as soon as he saw it. I then immediately called the rabbi on Shabbat, even though I know he's got a do not call please on Shabbat. And he saw when it was a call from me that he would answer it. He hadn't even seen it yet. And the rabbi also was on a summer vacation. So the first thing we needed was to have at the ready the phone information of congregational leadership, executive director, rabbi, key members of the community, maybe some past presidents that would be called on, and obviously your own JCRC or Federation leadership. And so to very quickly pull everybody together and to have the way to do that already decided. Is it going to be by text message? Is it going to be by some app like Slack or Planner or something else? How are you going to communicate on a weekend with the key people and make sure everybody is on the same page as you're sort of triaging what information there is? The next thing we had to do was have the conversation, which happens when it's anti-Semitic graffiti. Are we going to try and keep this quiet, or is it going to explode? And the fact that we didn't know where the photo had actually originated from, that it was flying around, we knew it was going to go big very quickly. And so the whole discussion about, do we try and take care of this behind the scenes, which is often the approach, if it's a swastika scratched onto a student desk or a bathroom door stall, and you don't know how long it's been there or anything like that, and it doesn't need to go onto the front page of the paper, that's one thing. This clearly was going to be something else. So we knew we would have to do some, deal with some intense media, and at the same time still be calm, especially for those community members and for this particular synagogue, which is a smaller synagogue, who's never dealt with anything. So sort of establishing our role as the adult calm presence in the room, the one with the connections, and to also defer to the synagogue. This happened at a synagogue, and their leadership needs to be informed. This also has to be directed by them. It wasn't JCRC swooping in to say this is how it has to happen. But I was very clear in those first conversations that JCRC will be as engaged as they want and will be prepared to step back if and when they feel like they have things under control. As far as and I could spend an hour talking about it, but I want to get to Doug's question. What do I know now that I needed to be better prepared for? Thankfully, David Sklar, our assistant director, has a relationship with a former Senate staffer in our Indiana State House who had done some PR and then recently, broke out on her own, specifically to do crisis management, media relations for nonprofits. And as Saturday turned into Sunday morning and social media was taking off and press was starting to call, and very quickly the Jewish community becomes impatient with a lack of what they perceive as a lack of response. Where are you? What are you doing? How did I find out about this on social media? And press needs to know who to talk to. And, I was helping the synagogue leadership write the first press release. But also trying to sort of navigate this being their synagogue versus JCRC. And we called in this media relations crisis management, and she was excellent. She came in on Sunday morning into a situation room, quote unquote, into the synagogue. And as the media started to descend upon the synagogue, she was able to walk out into the parking lot and say, I'm a spokesman on behalf of, leadership is inside doing X, Y, or Z. She just had the skill set ready to go. And we knew we could trust her because of the other nonprofits, particularly in the faith community that she had worked with recently. So if you don't have someone like that, I would say, look around, see who that might be. Because even though we've now done this, I would still hire her again. It is still really great to have somebody collecting all the media, being the point person for the media. She would forward media outlets onto me or onto a rabbi or onto the president, but she was that single point person to say, this is really where JCRC needs to answer the questions. This is really for the rabbi, and she was able to run point on all of the media. As far as deciding what the priorities were, as always, when it's JCRC, there's internal and then there's external. And we just had all hands on deck. And it became pretty clear. Some of it was responding to the outpouring of support and shock and, what can we do? And knowing that people wanted to do something, we quickly realized that having some sort of solidarity gathering was the way to go. It would allow people to walk into a synagogue. So within 24 hours of discovering the graffiti, of course, we had already reached out to ADL and communicated with law enforcement. And then I handed that off as far as local leadership. The synagogue had one board member who was in charge of security, and then the Jewish community and the Jewish community campus has somebody in charge of security. And I made sure that they were all communicating and made very clear that I'm handing this off to you. You should be in touch with ADL, with SCAN, Secure Community Network, and that, let me know if there's anything I need to know. But when it comes to the security and law enforcement, I have to put that in somebody else's court right now. And so I felt confident doing that. And then we started planning the solidarity gathering, and the synagogue had to get the synagogue ready. A synagogue that holds 600 people eventually held twice that. And JCRC pulled together the list of speakers, and really they let us do that. I knew that the rabbi should speak first and that their board presidents should speak last, and we were in charge of pulling everything else together in between. And now that it's post, we are, managing how we continue to maintain this conversation in a way that's educational and constructive and doesn't come off as capitalizing in some way on a horrific event, and really making it a quote unquote teaching moment for media, for schools, for other faith communities, and certainly for the Jewish community as well. That was like way longer than 5 minutes, Doug. It's impossible. I can't do it.
No, and I actually put down 10 because I figured there was no way. So that was perfect. Thanks, Lindsay. That was great. And one of the last part of today's title, when a real crisis breaks out and JCRC is on the front lines, how do you deploy people to assist and turn the crisis into an educable moment for the community? And that's the key, is to know that it can be brutal when you're in that 24/7 period. But in a way, the bigger the crisis, the bigger the educational moment. And look what now is going on in terms of a conversation about hate crimes, the absence of hate crime statutes in Indiana that Lindsay and again her colleagues have been focusing on in a way that otherwise might not have happened. So turning it into an opportunity is critically important. Kol hakavod again for doing that. I will say my own bias is, and it's great that you had a good crisis communications person to rely on. My own bias is that people tend to go too quickly in many cases to somebody from the outside who doesn't have the vocabulary or the cultural, feel for how to best respond. In this case, you did have somebody. But the more that we can do on our own, the better, I think. So with that in mind, and I don't know, I think I've been very proud of the sessions that we've had this summer, but I have failed miserably convincing everyone that you should have a video camera and be able to participate fully with people getting to know you in these sessions by also having the opportunity to for everybody to see each other. And it's going to be maybe a little challenging as we break up into small groups now. But I think what we're going to do is we're going to have two groups. And I think it's going to go random, right? Haya, does it go randomly? So I'm going to say that the group that I end up in is going to work on scenario number 1. And the group that I'm not in will work on scenario number 2. Those scenarios were sent to you just before, because we're not going to put them on the screen. They were sent just before we started. And in my cathartic moments, when I really want to be semi-sadistic about what the challenges are that we face in a community, I enjoy immensely conjuring up really bad scenarios because they're born of real life experience. There's not anything in them that doesn't smack of something that somebody has had to deal with. And the way it's structured, if we were to put it all on the screen for us to view, and we weren't breaking up into small groups, it's what I will call a cascading series of events. So here's what I want you to do in your group. Have somebody who will facilitate, have somebody who will record, what your group comes up with. That's very, very quick to do. And then spend 10 minutes on screen 1 of your scenario without even looking at screen 2. Then spend 10 minutes on screen 2, and then spend the last 10 minutes on screen 3, because each screen represents a complicating factor that has been introduced into the scenario. And then we will be automatically reconvened, right, Haya?
Yeah.
After 30 minutes, we will just be pulled back together, and I'll ask the reporter from each of the 2 groups to briefly share what you've come up with. But I think these give you a sense of, oh my God, what are we going to do when all hell breaks loose in our community? So with that, any questions about how we're going to do this? And let me just add, hopefully the people on the phone will also be broken up into a group. Just let people know you're there by giving verbal acknowledgement. But Zoom will automatically break us up into 2 groups.
Yes.
Okay? And again, the group I'm in will deal with scenario number 1. The group I'm not in will deal with scenario number 2. I think everybody was automatically muted. I hope people enjoyed that. It's an amazing feature of Zoom that it can just randomly break you up into discussion groups. And I don't know, and I think it was random, and at the same time, everybody who was on video was put in one group, and everybody who was on audio was put in another group. So maybe that worked well, but it was an interesting reality. So I'd love to hear somebody from group scenario number 2, briefly, not read the whole thing, briefly describe the scenario and share kind of what your thinking of how you might address it was. Who's going to do that?
This is Max. I'm happy to give it a shot.
Thanks, Max.
As long as my group members will chime in if I miss anything.
Go for it.
So our situation was that in an attempt to provide quote unquote balance, the local JCC was bringing in 2 Israeli speakers who are proponents of BDS. The 2 speakers are really involved in the community. They are well respected. And the Federation was receiving pressure to make the JCC cancel the program. And then, continuing on this course, somebody takes out a full page ad in the Jewish newspaper, pressuring the Federation to, again, have the J cancel this event. And then, so we'll deal with, I guess, those parts first, which are, we all thought that in terms of the players to bring in, that, of course, the Federation, and the Federation CEO requested the services of the JCRC director. So you would want the Federation board president, the Federation executive, the JCC executive director, and their board president. Certainly someone who deals with marketing and communications in terms of optics. You may also want to bring in the national JCC organization to see if they have any guidelines or assistance that they could provide. And some of the factors that we were looking at were, one, what kind of support was the Federation giving to this program? Do they give just general unrestricted funds to the J and they can do whatever they want with them? Or were they giving specific support to this program, in which case, if the Federation had an existing protocol or guidelines around what is a qualifying event and what are the factors to consider, then that would be a really important tool to have in the toolbox. And if it was general support, that would be harder. Also looking at what kind of sources or influence the folks had who were really calling on the Federation to use their influence to cancel this program. And of course, the relationships between the Federation, the J, and the rest of the community. And bringing clergy into this to see if they could have anything to offer. We did explore a few options, like would it be possible to bring more speakers in addition to these two Israeli proponents of BDS to help provide more balance? Are there other voices on the left that would kind of fill the criteria and be able to provide the kind of perspective that folks were looking for? So those were the kind of situations factors that we were raising, and some options for moving forward. And then the last part of it was that the J decides to go forward with the event, and there are protesters, both pro-BDS protesters and anti-BDS protesters, and the anti-BDS protesters saying that the J is a Jew-hating organization. And we all thought that was a total mess. We had solutions we could offer in terms of safety and security and the program continuing, but we were all, we said that sounds like that community could use a year of civil discourse or resetting the table, because they clearly have some challenges, and that the optics of that would be very troubling.
And one of the pieces on the last part of the scenario is that the JCC is going ahead with a program that you all disapprove of.
Yes.
But because of the protests around it and how high the potential for volatility is, they're asking for your help in making sure it goes as smoothly as possible, whether it's bringing in security personnel and the like, and you're sort of caught in between here. So that's the last part of that scenario. So good. Anybody else? Thanks, Max. And that was great. Anybody else from the group want to add something? Okay, so that was scenario number 2. Leslie is going to talk a little bit about what we discussed on scenario number 1.
Okay.
And what the scenario is itself.
Okay, so the scenario itself was at the community annual Yom HaShoah event planned by the JCRC. One of the invited speakers was a professor of Jewish studies, and in the course of his remarks and talking, he had a one-off comment associating Gaza with Warsaw and the increasing Nazi-like behavior of the Israeli government. And it quickly turned into a social media storm, and there were instant demands from the Jewish activists outside the community that the JCRC and the Federation issue a strong public statement condemning his remarks and demanding his ouster. And the JCRC statement asserts that his statements were inappropriate for the occasion, but refused to call for the ouster, and then that anger turns on the JCRC and the Federation. So the questions were, how do you address this set of challenges in the immediate aftermath and looking forward? And who do you enlist for help and in what ways? So one is that we talked about the idea of looking at facing the pressure from inside the Jewish community to address some of those issues. And talking about the fact that this person doesn't have a history of anti-Israel statements or stances, then maybe we could reach out to the Jewish Faculty Council to network in the community. We wanted to, in terms of not calling for his ouster, that's not really within our purview, and also to allow for the free market of ideas. Also talked about having possibly a conversation with the department head at the university. And also utilizing some resources within our Jewish community, including the Holocaust survivors, and talking with key leaders to talk to them about turning this into a learning opportunity. And then also, and again, just dealing with the managing our relationship with the university and their survivors and their children, and trying to utilize those and helping us to address the issue.
Okay, great. Anything else you want to add as we went down further, or?
Well, that was what we had for screen one. For screen two is when we kind of stepped into those larger, some of those larger.
Yeah, so keep going.
Okay. So, oh, sorry, I didn't realize we were doing all three at once. Okay. So it basically, the next is that the petition, there's an online petition that's condemned us for the speaker and said our response was too weak. And so we had like a major meeting with the Federation director and major donors. And they want to mount a community-wide campaign to oust the professor. So on our board, my board decided that we didn't want to dwell on this issue and they just want to move on. So we're concerned about the possibility the meeting could get out of hand. So how do we prepare? So we acknowledge that we would have to acknowledge where the JCRC, inviting this person might have been a mistake, but also we talked about the idea that we need to collectively have there needs to be a larger discourse around that bigger issue. We also talked that we could use a pastoral response to help steer the energy in a different way in the community, and to focus on working together as a community to address the problem. Let's see. We also thought that we could utilize our board members to help facilitate the conversation, and to access gatekeepers in the community, so people who could serve as a bridge to help, that would serve as a trust point for both groups, that could serve as a calming presence in that potentially contentious meeting. When that meeting went okay, but not great, it exploded later with it's gone. We arrive at our office and find that a giant swastika has been spray painted on the exterior wall of the Hillel building on campus. And the local general press has not covered the story up to this point, but now gets wind and you're inundated by local media. So what we focused on was our relationship with the Hillel director and the Hillel and the university administration, and helping to support Hillel. We also talked about make sure we have a good media plan in place, so that we would have who's going to talk to the media and what the basic message is going to say, so that it's clear, with the goal of keeping the two events separated in terms of being able to communicate that and not letting that spiral out of control and become larger than it needs to be. And to also be in active communication with the Jewish community itself. And again, to take that opportunity to maybe bring the key leaders from the Jewish organizations and the community together, if not in the immediate the immediate aftermath, but further on down the road. So looking at what we're going to do immediately, and then over the next couple of weeks and the next couple of months to deal with these ongoing issues. But using that as a teachable moment.
Great. Well done. Thanks, Leslie. Anybody want to add from that group? So, Lindsay, it looked like you were going to say something. Go for it.
I just want to say that one of the biggest things I've had this conversation with Doug, at other times with other scenarios, and I think I always look for sort of what can keep me on some sort of sense of a track. what can help me feel like I've got my bearings. And this idea, all of the questions he posed to us after each of these screens is, who are we engaging? That's a consistent question. Who are we enlisting to help? And how are we thinking about, beyond the immediate addressing of the situation, how does it become a teachable moment? And I think that's just really helpful for me to bear in mind in all of these scenarios.
Great. Thanks, Lindsay. Any other reactions generally to going through this exercise? People want to share what it felt like, other than quick? Max is just texting saying it was so helpful. What I think is also really helpful is to figure out who's your core team. You know, it's going to differ community by community, whether if you're an independent JCRC versus a committee of the Federation, and there's somebody in the communications department and there's somebody else. But who's your core team with whom you could go through one of these kinds of scenarios and sort of, you know, how wonderful to be able to go through a miserable scenario that you will never really go through, and sort of plot out how you would respond. Who would we need to bring in? How would we handle it? How would we try to, you know, we often talk about not solving, but mitigating. When we come in to help various Jewish institutions that are dealing with the crisis, we're talking about how do we mitigate? How do we bring the temperature down? How do we turn a horrible situation ultimately into an opportunity? How do we deal with it and contain it to the best extent that we can, and the like? And I think going through these kinds of scenarios can be actually incredibly helpful. And of course, everybody today went through only one of the two. And as I said, these are kind of a conglomerate of a variety of real life kinds of scenarios that have occurred over time. But the way they are structured is pretty realistic in terms of how they can play out. So it's not as hypothetical as any of us wishes they were, and therefore I think can be very grounded and very useful. The other piece that I wanted to share with everybody today in the last few minutes is something that we put together in San Francisco, which is a crisis communications template. And Haya, who, by the way, I just want to say at the very beginning, when I had everybody go around and introduce themselves, I didn't say Haya today, but we could not do so much of what we do at JCPA without Haya, including this. So Haya, thank you so much for that. Okay. There's thunderous applause among people who are on mute. So if you can put on the screen, and we sent this with the initial announcement or the reminder last week, the crisis communications template. And it's been my desire for every session to have some material that could be useful. I actually can't remember if this is in the long version of the professional manual or not, but in any event, if we could pull it up, that would be great. And I just want to highlight a couple of pieces of it, because you can look at it and say, and it'll come up hopefully in a second. Here it is. You can look at it and say, oh my God, this is overwhelming. We're a teeny shop. But I don't want you to be blown away by the fact that there's a lot of different teams and committees and the like. I want you to understand the kind of core principle involved here. First of all is the definition of a crisis. And I'm going to read it because we actually spent some time thinking what differentiates kind of the everyday messy situations that we deal with and an authentic crisis for which you need to implement serious crisis management and crisis communications. And our definition is any situation that threatens your institution's safety, integrity, or reputation, usually brought on by an adverse or negative situation, often which garners media attention. The situation could be related to a legal dispute, theft, accident, crime, natural or man-made disaster, or sensitive community relations matter attributed to or focused on your institution. Typically, what separates a crisis from a sensitive but more routine situation is a disruption that causes community or media scrutiny that could negatively affect your organization's reputation, finances, legal standing, or future. Your ability to proactively plan for and rehearse your response will dramatically mitigate the implications of the crisis. So we use this as a template and do trainings for Jewish institutions throughout the community. Synagogues have faced these kinds of crises with an embezzlement, a summer camp with a tragedy of a tree falling and killing a counselor. this summer with the fires in California, yet again affecting Jewish camping. As I look out on my, and I'm, 100 miles away, but the smoky air here. So many different, the whole point being you never quite know where the crisis is going to come from. I think it's a really good working definition of a crisis. And then the key objective: to effectively manage a crisis and the necessary internal and external communications through a formal, clearly defined protocol in order to mitigate the crisis, avoid or mitigate serious and negative repercussions, and maintain a reputation of leadership and transparency on vital issues. Many people have emergency preparedness plans. Most buildings are required to have an emergency preparedness plan. Very few Jewish institutions have a crisis management or crisis communications plan. So this lays out, and I'm not going to read it all, the truisms of managing a crisis. If you scroll down, you'll see it right below the key objectives. That life and safety are paramount. To ensure transparency, tell the truth, tell the story, tell it quickly, tell it publicly. To preserve the reputation and integrity of the organization. If the organization has made a mistake, all messaging and actions must be rooted in maintaining and protecting the integrity, reputation, and viability of the organization while reestablishing credibility, and everything subject to legal counsel's advice, which is critically important to bring in the lawyers in many of these kinds of situations. So here then is a list of the kinds of teams you might want to put together, who would be on the various teams. It continues down on the crisis management sequence checklist, which talks about making sure that you've covered, all the key kinds of things that you would want to have for crisis communications. And then if you scroll down to number 6, you will see what the team actually does. It develops one overarching message while taking privacy concerns into account. It develops targeted messages for various kinds of stakeholders. It ensures the security staff has activated any emergency communication system. It delivers to both the board of directors and staff various kinds of internal communications and instructions. You can read all of this. My goal here is to make sure that you don't just throw it away or put it aside, but you see, what could be useful. And then the honing the message and position of your organization, I think, is very important in terms of, what you will consider talking about in terms of the crisis. And then when you turn to the next page, what the team will keep in mind when crafting a message. And there you will see it's essential to acknowledge any mistakes subject to legal counsel and privacy considerations, important to apologize to any aggrieved parties, to maintain consistent and credible online presence. People remember what they hear first and last, and the tone in which it is conveyed, and so on down the line, and sort of kind of the art of framing the response. So we have, and then at the very end, it talks about what are some of the things you want to be sure you have. A staff roster with emergency contact information, roster of emergency contact information, media contacts, key leadership of other communities, passcodes for administration of all social media accounts. So again, I don't have the time today to go through it all, but I think it is a really good guide that if you decide to take a serious approach to formalizing crisis communications, which I recommend, then this can be a template that will be useful. In fact, I will say I know of at least 3 Jewish institutions that have gone through our trainings that have said to us specifically that as a result of having that training, they were able to dramatically mitigate a crisis in their institution. So as I said at the outset, a crisis could affect an institution, a subset of the community, or the entire community. What I always think of in terms of my view of the expansive idea of community relations and what our expertise is that while we normally are on the front lines for the community relations issues, the political issues of the community, we have expertise in terms of community relations as it may affect institutions throughout our community where they may face a crisis. And to bring to bear that expertise, that nuance, that ability to handle complexity and various moving parts is an invaluable and unique role that the JCRC can play in the community. So the discussions we had today, while centered on issues for which the JCRC is really in a way front and center or dragged in, is also applicable even if we're not front and center and not dragged in, but where the community itself is implicated. And it's an area where I hope that most of you will never need to, rev up the engine for. But as Lindsay can attest to from 10 days ago, there's just no way to operate on that hope. You have to be prepared. And the more prepared you are, the better. And today, what I hope we felt as a result of going through the exercise in the small rooms, in particular, was to get a sense of what does that feel like to be prepared. Understanding that there will be audibles that have to be called. There will be things that there are no way in the world to be fully prepared for. But as Lindsay echoed, if you have those key questions in mind that I laid out, then I think it can be really helpful in terms of turning a very messy, often negative situation into an opportunity and even ultimately a positive community building experience for the community, as I think you've done in Indianapolis, for example. So I think that concludes our time today. I hope you will fill out your evaluations. And also, as always, I've enjoyed the individual follow-up from people who have taken the summer webinars with any questions you have about this. If you need another copy of the crisis communications template that Haya sent out, please let Haya know. You have the scenarios that were sent out right before the meeting, and I encourage you to go through the scenario that you didn't go through today, at least with some folks back at home, lay and professional, by the way. And just a reminder that next week's session, I think we only have 2 left out of our 10 this summer, is on resource development with this important subtitle. Definitely not just for independent JCRCs. What are the creative ways to expand resources for your JCRC? So I hope you will join us. And I'm grateful for everyone joining us today. And when we talk about expanding resources, we will talk about getting cameras for everyone. Okay, thanks everyone. So appreciate your joining. Bye-bye.